Hello there, I'm Rusty Anderson, and welcome to the Berkeley Blogs. How's that? Good to meet you guys.
Yeah, very nice to meet you.
Nice
Yeah,
to meet
cool.
you.
Yeah, so I'd like to talk to you a little bit about music schools.
Okay.
To start the conversation because we're all from Berkeley.
I'm going to bring my posture up here
Yeah.
for you guys.
School's in session.
I know.
Exactly. So I'd like to talk to you. Have you ever had experience like teaching in one of the schools? Have you ever had any relationship with Berkeley whatsoever?
No relationship with Berkeley. It's sort of the other side of the coast situation because I'm from Southern Cal.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I've never been to Berkeley, but I've heard great things. I've heard, it's one of the main schools.
Yeah, Berkeley is a fun place, and a lot of my peers and colleagues look up to you in your playing, your musicality a lot.
That's very kind.
In the school. Yeah, exactly. And I would also like to talk to you about like being at Berkeley. We realize how different it can be from being a live performer and a studio musician. And I'd like to talk about a little bit about that. How do you achieve excellence in both sides? You know, I know a lot of players that are really great live performers, but not as great studio musicians. And you're obviously the top of both worlds.
I've been doing the same thing since I was 5, kind of, right? Yeah. So, just a lot of focus. Like when I was 9 years old, I'd say, hey, yeah, let's be friends. Why don't you play the drums? Or why don't you play the bass? Or, and then we can be friends because I always wanted to play with people and jam and play guitar. And my whole focus, probably to a fault, was, very tunnel visioned around guitar and music. And I played some keyboards, there was an organ around the house and later a piano, and I kind of suck, but, I get my way around there and it sort of helps, with the whole musical thing.
Sure.
And, but yeah, I've been doing the same thing forever. And I think being, having some friends that sort of migrated into other things, and I had a manager that helped get some music to producers, and then so I was sort of always thought, I'm gonna make it when I graduate high school.
I was
go to England or something, and
I was going to ask you about that. I was researching for this interview, and I learned that you recorded your first album when you were 13. Is that right?
Well, I was recording music. There was a little a tape recorder, just a mono tape recorder. And we'd record all the time, like a song a day, just my friends and I, just, goofing around, having fun.
My question is, did you know back then that you would be doing this for the rest of your life?
I think I always sort of assumed it in some really naive, goofy way.
That was your life, so you just kept living it, right?
Yeah, because I don't think it looks good on paper to be a musician.
So you don't really write the plan out.
Don't mean to say that, but I sort of just follow my muse, and that was my thing, and I ended up here. But it's a very, as I look back, it's a very strange path that I never could have predicted how it all went, and I couldn't predict it at the time, and just sort of try to keep my eye on that ball, and yeah. So anyway, I forgot the question, but
that was pretty much the answer.
Yeah, being absolutely one of the busiest performers in the whole world, I would like to ask you, how do you manage and you budget your time between doing all the touring and all the performing with McCartney and doing your own project, which I understand you just came out with?
It's crazy, man.
Recently, which is a great single, by the way.
Oh, Effortless?
Yeah. Very good.
To talk about that actually, it's called Rusty Anderson Afternoon. It's a band.
Yeah.
Right? And we've been sort of working on that over the last year, and I sort of fit in the cracks between touring. Paul's really wanted to tour a lot in the last number of years, which is great, but that it does make it a little nuttier to figure out how to do recording. So I have a studio at my house, although we're moving, and so that's been really nutty because I'm staying in the Southern California area, but that adds to the cacophony, and I have a 2-year-old now, a daughter, and that's amazing, and but that adds definitely to the cacophony. So I guess you just do it. I think it's a busy time, you know, now that the digital age is here and all the cell phones and the computers and Twitter and stuff. It's just there's constant distractions and constant reasons for people to have ADHD or whatever.
Yeah.
And it makes it harder to focus and harder to do, they call them the legato tasks.
The legato tasks.
As opposed to the staccato task, which you, as musicians, would...
Short bursts of a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Those things that take some... Like, you can't rush recordings. You can't rush...
Yeah.
There's certain things you just got to take a bunch of time. You know, I've got a storage unit I have to deal with. You can't rush it. It's like, you just got to go there and go, throw that out. Give that to the thrift store, you know.
You can't burn the food that you're trying to cook, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But do you often get inspired by all the traveling you do? But all the does your experiences with Paul, for instance, or for whichever artist you're working in that set time, does that inspire you to change or to like create?
Well, one thing I guess
it's
certainly opened up my eyes to a lot of just people, and like, you know, I mean, you go to different parts of the world and they have different musical impressions of like what they like. I mean, obviously traveling with Paul, you know, there's going to be a certain Paul Beatles wings kind of slant to maybe their taste range, but you know, I mean, the set will change up when we go to different different countries and different cities and stuff. But yeah, there's just I wouldn't even really exactly know how to answer that question. I mean, we've gone from, well, we'll play Mexico City, then go to the White House and do a show there, and then go to England, and then Scotland, and then, you know, and it's very kind of schizophrenic, the whole thing. And it's pretty quick paced. So, and it's something that I never really imagined doing, the degree of like airplane frequent flyer miles I would get, you know, and all that.
Since we're talking about traveling and especially McCartney, I was in 2004 in that summer tour that you did in Europe. I was in Lisbon for that gig, and like as a fan, I was holding my tears not to cry throughout the whole thing. But as a musician, I was constantly asking myself, how did these guys decide which, like you and Brian Ray, which of those classic solos you're gonna like? Is that a big fight about that, or?
Well, basically, I'm the lead guitarist.
Yes. Yeah.
And we did Driving Rain, and that record, Abe and I came in, and because this producer that we worked with started working with Paul and brought us in, and then when we started touring in 2002, Brian came in and to do the bass and guitar and you know, all this stuff like that. So, and Brian does a few solos too. But yeah, it was sort of, that's sort of the basic deal. It's hard because it sort of depends on, you know, I mean, with Paul's playing piano, Brian's going to play bass.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
And so that, it's Paul changing around all the time affects the way that sort of.
And then you guys have the three guitar.
Right, the three guitar thing at the end, right. So yeah, it's a lot of fun for everybody. Everybody gets to, you know, get out there and do all sorts of things.
Sweet. What's the most, this is a funny question that a friend of mine, actually when I mentioned to her that I was going to do this interview, she was just like, yeah, what is the most surprising thing about working with Paul? Like, what's the thing that you would never imagine? Like,
I think, you know, like we were talking, the media does this thing where it puts it, you know, it's a way for people to connect with a performer or a celebrity or whatever, right? They get all this airtime and television, movies, whatever. Social media. And then you go, then everyone kind of feels like they know that person. And in fact, I have a song on a record called Born on Earth called Julia Roberts, and it's about that phenomenon, about how like you look and you see in the tabloids and celebrities and, you know, newspapers and all this stuff, they bombard you, and you don't really think about it or have a choice. I mean, if you live on planet Earth, or at least in a city, you know, you're going to see all that stuff and you're going to be exposed to it. So you get to know who all these personalities are, but they don't know you. And you feel like you know them, and you know about their lives, about their, you know, sex lives or whatever. And then I had a dream about Julia Roberts, just totally out of the blue. I hadn't thought of her in years, and I don't even know why I had this dream about her. And but But I thought it was so odd, and I wrote it down. I sort of felt like I was being stalked, you know, by celebrities, you know, because I didn't choose to know her.
Channeling Rusty Anderson.
Yeah, something like that. So the song was a reverse stalking. But to go back to the original question, you know, when I first worked with Paul, I kind of thought, I didn't even expect to really ever meet a Beatle, much less work with one. So it took me like, I don't know, a number of days, a week, whatever, to really get used to, I mean, I was used to playing with them instantly. Like, you know, just we started jamming within half an hour, and he was playing the bass, or he played, anyway, we were switching around instruments, and pretty quickly I got into that groove because it's something I've done so much, and it's an instant way to communicate with other musicians and people. But as a guy hanging out, you know, because I'm a little bit sort of a goofball myself, you know, I always was a musician first and sort of like a social being second. You know, and maybe a number of musicians can relate to that.
Yeah.
And that's something I think that over, you know, the course of, especially working with Paul, and over just, you know, time, you know, being forced to being around other humans a lot.
Yeah.
You know, then you start to...
So that brought the whole social aspect out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, I think that's something, Paul's a gracious guy, and is very inclusive of everybody in the room and puts people at ease. And I think some of those things have maybe rubbed off, hopefully, by osmosis. But that was something I never really clocked or paid a lot of attention to until I started, you know, hanging out with Paul and being in that thing, sort of that social muscle that's really necessary, as well as that internal thing that makes people gravitate towards music in the first place, is such this ethereal way to communicate. You know?
I mean, I obviously don't know everyone else in the team, but like I said, I met Abel Borio yesterday in the street, and now I'm meeting you. So it seems that the whole vibe of the whole band is like that. It's very inclusive and very pleasant and gracious, right?
Yeah, that's sort of the way it kind of has to be. For this thing to run.
You guys spend so much time together, right?
Well, it's been together. We've been playing together for over a decade, well over a decade.
2001, right?
Yeah. And so, you know, it's got, a lot of bands don't last that long. I mean, the Beatles weren't together that long. You know?
That's crazy.
And then you see why, because it's really easy for for miscommunications, for people to, you know, just misunderstand each other, for, you know, egos.
Personality clashes.
There's just so many reasons. Musical differences, all this stuff where bands are not together as long as you would think from the outside. A lot of my favorite groups, you know, they're together for a little bit, then they break up, and I'm like, oh my God, that's tragic. You know, but now I kind of, after being in like 15 bands myself over the years or however many, I understand.
You were talking about Peter Gabriel a little bit there.
About who?
Peter Gabriel, Leaving Genesis.
Yeah, exactly. That was a big deal for me, because I was that combo was pretty magical.
Oh yeah.
I thought, you know.
One of my favorite bands of all time too.
Although I recently realized that they were very influenced by a band called Family.
Family?
Yeah.
Oh,
they had their first album was out. I haven't listened to the whole thing yet. I just realized this a few days ago. Their first album was out like in 1968 or something. And it's interesting to see the progression of music, like all these people influencing people.
Yeah, there's always
right? There's always some secret influence
that they wanted to sound like. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah.
And how do you actually, like, when you get an invitation like that, how do you pick your guitar amp and your actual guitar in the battles? How do you find your voice for each project, and especially for McCartney's, because you're playing like classic rock, endless, timeless songs.
Well, I think my approach has sort of been
a very modern, fresh sound at the same time.
Well, I think I went through a period of, you know, doing a lot of sort of more affected guitars, and I usually would use maybe 2 or 3 pedals at the most at once. I would use like a whole giant cacophony of pedals, because it just sounds like nonsense. Like each thing has to have something. Yeah, like a lawnmower or something, a digital one. And so, I mean, I like usually analog effects, but I like things that do something. You know, if an effect is going to be in a chain, it has to do something, and it has to do something that makes it better than no effect. So I went through a phase of using a lot of crazy, trying to always make my guitar sound like something else. And then I went through a phase after that where I just really wanted pure guitar sound.
Yeah.
And playing with Paul, that's more the norm. Just like trying to find, because if you get, the main thing to me is for the guitar to speak, to have a really good sound. The frequencies to be right.
The guitar, right.
So it has personality, but it's not like, so it has an organic quality, because organic usually means that there's some natural nuance that's way more special than you could like create, with machines. Let the natural tones that want to be there speak, and sort of accentuate those instead of the grotesque features. Unless you want to accentuate the grotesque features for certain things.
It should be an artistic choice, right? Not,
right. Yeah, I think it should be very deliberate, all these things, or that's my take anyway. But yeah, so.
Yeah, do you have a concept about it, or it builds with the sound of the band? And has it evolved throughout this more than a decade? Throughout these years, your sound, did it evolve? Did you like change guitars?
Oh yeah, it's constantly changing. Like now I have a signature Gibson model. It's a blonde 335, and I've been playing that. I finally got the third prototype, and they got it right, and it's a great guitar. I was really happy because I didn't want to put out a guitar with my name on it that wasn't right.
Yeah.
And so I've actually been playing that. That one's like slightly lighter in weight than my original 59, which was patterned after. The new one's patterned after, and the weight is everything, because that allows the guitar to resonate. And if you're like me and you've been playing a billion gigs with a guitar strap on your shoulder, it starts to like mess up your shoulder and stuff. So you don't want to have like, that's one reason I would never play a Les Paul live night after night.
Yeah.
I use it for a song or something.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah. So the 335 is sort of my favorite all-around guitar, and and this one's really groovy, and it's been sort of, I've learned a lot in the process about the guitars, about pots, about, some electronic things, about internal, the depth of the anchors. There's so many things, the binding, visual things, sonic things, resonant things. And but yeah, I've gone through a number of racks, sort of put together. My original one was sort of like, the kitchen sink, so that if I go into the studio, I have what I need for every single situation. I've kind of kept that premise together, but narrowed it down a little bit, because you can't really do everything. And if you try to really do everything, in my book, you'll compromise the basics, right? Yeah. Which is just to get a good sound. And I try to use basically, if I want to clean up my guitar, I turn it down. And that's why the pot's really important. And then you turn it up and you get more distortion instead of doing the channel switching thing, which is cool too. But I think you're safer if you have, like, say, one cabinet for dirty sounds and one cabinet for cleaner sounds, and then you have two microphones, and then your sound man, 99.9% of the chance, unless he's so dialed in and your best friend and always on it, there's going to be a volume discrepancy. Yeah, and it's not going to be right. You think you're doing one thing, and the audience will hear another.
With the volume knob all the time, doing solos and doing like.
It's really crucial, and for the way my stuff's set up, that is. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, and I sort of figured that there's certain things that are just simpler and work better for me, like that.
In a bunch of other interviews I read, and I've heard you talk about many of the guitarists that influenced you when you were, when you were growing up, or the guitarists that were big influences on you. Do you have current guitarists that you check out that influence you still, from current bands right now?
Guitarists?
Yeah, upcoming artists and guitarists that he's doing some cool things with sound here. It's plays interesting.
Well, I think the ones that influenced me over time the most were Jimi Hendrix, Mick Ronson, Jeff Beck, Adrian Belew, people like that.
Adrian Belew.
And I also did my time with the jazz band in college, and you know, got yelled at a lot for being late.
The rock approach to a jazz gig.
Yeah, no, I was like, fire that guitar player. That's what you say. But yeah, but that, I learned a lot about that stuff. I mean, not that I, you know, sit around going ba 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 da da very much, you know.
So no jazz steps tonight.
Probably not. And you know, and studied a little bit of classical, and you know, I love blues, you know, and I love Debussy and Gershwin, and so there's some blues aspects to classical music and their thing, and so I think all these things just sort of come together, and it influenced me. I think, I mean, there's a lot of really cool guitar players out there. I mean, all the tunings that Michael Hedges, Joni Mitchell, you know, David Crosby have done. You know, Robert Fripp has some interesting tunings.
Yeah, Robert Fripp is interesting everything.
Yeah, you know, Jack White's a really interesting player. I mean, he gets very, like, a lot more sort of like, he doesn't mind getting really sort of lo-fi and out of control and noisy and
out of
tune and stuff. Yeah. And I kind of dig that to a degree, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm influenced by anything. You know, this tablecloth is influencing me right now. You know what I mean? It's like anything, and I think that most people are. You don't always notice what you're being influenced by.
Exactly. I was going to ask, do you like going to the movies, going to a museum, reading, or maybe playing football, or you know, stuff like that in your life could inspire your music?
Well, I think lately I've been getting into yoga a bit more, and I love riding my bike. I mean, especially after a tour, you know, or sometimes if I can set it up on the tour. But you know, you go around, you're in airplanes and elevators and hotels and all these boxes all the time, and you just want to get out, and you're being driven around and stuff, and you're sort of at the mercy of that, which is, you know, an amazing thing to be able to pull off and to be a part of. But then when you get home, you just go, and I love to go out and ride my bike and you just sort of feel like I can turn this way, I can turn that way, I can get some fresh air, there's nothing above me but sky, you know. It's great. I love to read. I love, you know, I don't watch maybe as many movies as I've been sort of trying to catch up on Breaking Bad, which is really interesting. It's very stressful. It's a very stressful thing.
But then you have to watch the next episode because it's like in that
in the beginning
state
it's
of
just
mind.
it's so harsh, and you're like, oh, then you get used to it.
Yeah.
It's better. Yeah, so I often ask this to pretty much everyone that I interview, so I'll be interested in what you're going to say. What are your top 5 favorite albums of all time?
Top 5 favorite albums of all time. Well, Axis Bold as Love comes to mind.
Yeah.
It's sort of the guitar Bible, because the tones on there are just mind-blowing. You know, I go through phases. I mean, you know, I think especially it would be hard to put a Beatles record in there just because now I'm so over-familiar with the songs, you know, that they, in a way, sometimes if you hear a record a whole bunch of times, the music becomes components.
Yeah.
You ever notice that? Especially with older music, because they didn't have all the overdubs, so you don't hear as many instruments.
So it's very separate. You can
which I also love. I think that whole sort of minimalist production is very hard to do.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's cool if you can pull it off. But then it's cool to do like smears and stuff where you have maybe you add slightly cacophonous elements to very
minimal production,
or to a very sort of sublime or smooth or sweet track to kind of mess it up a little bit. Yeah. There's a lot of alluring things about this age of, you know, millions of overdubs and stuff. But let's see. Okay, yeah, definitely Axis Bold as Love. I love Tomita's Snowflakes Are Dancing. It's mind blowing. I mean, there's the classic records, you know, be it Sticky Fingers or something, or you know, the White Album,
Yeah.
all those kinds of things, which would be on there. I mean, I go through phases with that stuff. I really like Help a lot as a record. And there's a Skip James record, which I love, and I don't know the name, but it's basically a compilation of his stuff. It's amazing.
Best stuff.
Yeah. I listen to a lot. And I guess more and more, like sort of as I get older, I have a tendency to go back and listen to, you know, separate songs in the iTunes world, you know, or bits by, you know, Howlin' Wolf or Young the Giant has some pretty cool stuff.
Young the Giant,
And let's see, I'd probably have to put Nursery Crimes by Genesis on there.
Yes. My best friend.
Let's see. I know, it's like a game show.
Andre is in love with you forever now. It's his favorite.
I already
album.
was, man.
Yeah, that's a good.
Made
Well,
it to the camera now.
yeah. Foxtrot, Selling England are great too, but that's Nursery Crimes probably my favorite.
Oh, so good.
And I don't know how many I've made yet, but
I think that's good. I mean,
yeah.
we could be talking about albums of mine.
yeah, you could go on forever. You know, there's so many cool ones.
Rusty, let me ask you. History tells us that George Harrison would bring these new songs to the Beatles rehearsals because they had John Lennon and Paul McCartney. It would be very hard for him to. Well, since you are a solo artist too and you have your own songs, did you ever try to bring some of your tunes to McCartney's gig? Or
I think the closest I got, my first record, which is called Undressing Underwater, I heard a song called Catbox Beach.
Oh, okay.
And
Same album.
we were, same album. We were in a band together.
With Stanley Clark, right?
Right, called Animal
Yeah,
Logic.
that's sweet.
And so we sort of, you know, we're sort of buddies, and he's a wonderful guy. Anyway, but yeah, that was really a fun experience, playing with Paul and having him come in and play bass on the song. He's sitting there learning it and kind of cursing himself when he makes a mistake. And, you know, it was very endearing and just an incredible honor.
Yeah,
you know, incredible
absolutely.
honor to have that happen. But yeah, Paul basically he writes by himself, and I think he sort of looks at, like, although he's done a little bit with Elvis Costello and that kind of thing, for the most part he looks at himself as you know, his collaborative partner was John Lennon, and since then you know, he's a solo artist, and he's kind of like, I don't know, that's the way he does it, but
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm good.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, man. Yeah.
Thank you, Rusty, very much.